started at Reed's College and graduated as a math major. After that, she joined the Peace Corps for 2 years in Namibia, where she taught math and English for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. Upon returning to the US, she joined Glass, Lewis & Company, where she advised institutional investors on mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and hostile takeovers. And now she takes that financial experience and what she learned at SOM, and she designs scalable solutions for some of the society's biggest problems. She's here today to tell us more about her remarkable work. Please join me in welcoming Katy Davis.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I think the only thing you didn't mention is that I'm also a proud 2012 graduate of Yale SOM. Very excited to be back. I'm a managing director at ideas42. I primarily lead our consumer finance work, but I also work in other domains that relate to how people think about their money, including charitable giving and financial aid systems. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what ideas42 is, talk about the broad research questions that we're tackling around charitable giving, and then share some insights from testing we've done applying behavioral design in that area. All right, so what is ideas42? We are a nonprofit. We have academic roots. And what we try to do is take insights from the academic world, specifically in behavioral science, and apply it to the real world. In particular, we apply it in areas where traditional solutions have been less effective, and we face what we call last mile problems, where there's something about human behavior that's preventing that solution from being effective. As I mentioned, we have roots in the academic world, having been founded by 2 behavioral economists and a psychologist. We still tap into those networks through our advisory board, where the folks pictured here help set our research agenda. And we have a wider affiliate of academics, including a lot of professors that you work with, who we tap into on specific projects where we can use their expertise. Yet most of our employees are actually practitioners. So we have folks with a wide range of backgrounds, from management consulting to finance to working for the nonprofits that we partner with. And what we do is we apply that research and engage directly with organizations to conduct behavioral problem solving. It happens across sectors. We're primarily foundation funded. We work with foundations like Gates, Ford Foundation, City Foundation, and we'll get a grant, we'll find a partner, whether that's a nonprofit or a private sector firm, and sometimes a government agency, and we'll try to tackle a behavioral problem and try to generate a solution. So consumer finance and economic mobility have been at our core since the very beginning. But in the past few years, we've branched out into a lot of different areas, including post-secondary education, health, both domestically and internationally. We've started working through the government at the federal level, the state level, and within cities in what we call nudge units. And a newer area for us is criminal justice, where we've been working with the lab in Chicago. And our work is probably 60% domestic, 40% international. Our international work is primarily in developing countries. And our methodology, which I'll refer to throughout this presentation, is something we call behavioral diagnosis and design, which draws upon a lot of different research methods. So we start off trying to understand very broadly the type of problem that we're solving. We try to strip away our assumptions about that problem. Then we go in and do diagnosis, which is some qualitative research, meaning we do interviews, we do focus groups, we look at available data, we do observations in the field, and we use that diagnosis to shape a design, which is typically 1 or 2 behavioral elements that we deliver through an experiment. So we'll try to conduct a randomized control trial to see if what we designed was effective or not. And after that, we try to scale our impact, whether that's by teaching other organizations how to apply what we've learned, creating toolkits or resources for folks to interact with, or sometimes to work with an organization to actually scale up the design across their client base. So that's a little bit about us, but let's get into the behavioral side. So we know that America is a very generous country. In some recent statistics, we see that the US ranks #2 worldwide of generous countries, above countries that you might be surprised to see lower on the list, like the UK, like the Netherlands, like Australia and Canada. And when you look at the giving here that we're talking about, individual charitable giving, or giving to charitable causes, is actually larger segment-wise than many other types of giving. It's larger than gifts from foundations, it's larger than bequest or estate giving, and it's even bigger than corporate giving. So you can see that individual households in the US are actually quite generous and in the practice of giving to charity. And yet, we still think there might be room for improvement. We did an online survey of more than 400 folks, and we asked them to think about the average household in your neighborhood and what % of their total income should they be donating to charity this year. The average answer that we got was 6.1%. Right? This is answering about what someone else should be doing. And if you compare that to what people are actually giving, it's only about 3% of their annual income that they're donating to charity. So this makes us wonder, could there be a gap in giving between how much people think one should be giving and what they actually end up donating on an annual basis? We also think it's worth thinking beyond just the wealthy. A lot of philanthropy practices focus on high net worth individuals and encouraging those individuals to make gifts. Obviously, this is hugely important as a majority of giving is generated from the wealthy. And yet, if you look at the contributions as a percentage of income, it's really interesting to me here that it's a U-shaped curve. If you look at giving as a percentage of income, actually the very low income are also giving heavily compared to the amount of income that they generate. And it's really these folks in the middle who seem to be giving lower amounts and giving less frequently. So for comparison, of those affluent households we're talking about, almost 100% give some amount, and yet compared to the general population, only about 65% of households are giving. So it seems like there's an opportunity here, both in terms of how much people think they should be giving, as well as whether they give at all. And most of the research to date tells us two things about charitable giving. One is that it's often reactive in nature. So you can imagine getting an email from a friend who's running a race asking you to donate. And the second thing we know is that it's often emotionally driven. So in interviews, in surveys, people say that they give because of that emotional connection that they feel having given, that they give in order to feel good. So this has been corroborated in a lot of different research. We see it in surveys, in interviews, and I think it's for this reason that a lot of the research to date is just about how to structure the ask. So assuming that people are only going to give when asked, how can we best structure that ask? And yet we think that behavioral science has a lot more to say than just about how to structure the ask. One of the benefits of behavioral science is that it often gives us a different lens from which to view the world, right? We're probably all familiar with these types of optical illusions, where if you look from one angle, it looks like, what is that? A frog, a toad. If you turn it around, it's a horse's head. I think, not to oversimplify it, but behavioral science gives us a different angle to view people's behavior. And it, in particular, gives us a different perspective on people themselves. So if we think of people as being like Spock, he's a Vulcan, he's perfectly rational. When he makes decisions, we think of Spock weighing costs and benefits. If the benefits outweigh the costs, he'll decide yes. He will act in accordance with his decision, and the outcome will follow, right? This is the rational model of decision making. It's what economics teaches us. It's what we see robots behaving like. On the other end of the spectrum, people sometimes think of people as being more like Homer Simpson, right? He's definitely not making any kind of cost-benefit analysis. He's just looking for what benefits him or what suits his mood. He's impulsive, he's short-sighted. At ideas42, we think that people are somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. We think that people are sometimes very rational, very calculating. Other times, people are impulsive and short-sighted. And together, we think it means that people make odd choices. We're quirky. We do funny things. If those of you who've seen Elaine Bennis on Seinfeld, she's a pretty smart woman. She's pretty with it, generally. And yet you see her making funny choices, such as how to dance at this wedding. So it's our viewpoint of people that often shapes the type of solutions that we generate. And whether we view people as Spock or as Homer, that can really influence the types of designs that we're creating. Another quick story to share with you guys. In World War II, the US military developed the B-17 bomber. It was a state-of-the-art aircraft. They had some of the best pilots in the world. So when they rolled out this plane, they were very puzzled when something started happening. The pilots kept crashing the plane at landing. And they had a hard time figuring out why this was happening. Their first thought was, maybe we just need to train pilots better. Maybe they don't know what they're doing. So they did a lot of extra training. They thought, maybe it's a motivational problem. The pilots don't understand what they should be doing. So they created a campaign, Excellent Airmen Commit No Errors, trying to convince them not to make this mistake. But what they ultimately did was they hired a psychologist named Alphonse Chapanis. They had him sit down with the pilots in the cockpit and fly around with them. What they found was that at landing, the pilots had two different gears that they needed to maneuver. One was to slow down the plane by making the flaps pull up. Another lever was to retract the landing gear. And it's hard to see here, actually way in the back, it's two of those levers that look exactly the same with the black knobs on it. And because they were positioned right next to each other and they looked exactly the same, these pilots, even though they were experienced, even though they were excellent pilots, would pull the wrong lever. So what he did was he created a shape coding system that's actually still used today in airplanes, where one of the levers had a circle on it, one of the levers had a triangle on it. So that simple differentiation within the context ended up solving the problem. Pilots were no longer crashing the plane at landing. So the point here is that often what we think might be a problem with the people is often instead a problem with the context. It's a problem with our own designs in how we create that context. And it means that as designers, we actually have a lot of influence over people's behaviors because we know that that context influences people's behavior. But does this apply to issues around ethics and morality? Could it be that the context also affects the way we behave there? Some of you are probably familiar with this study. I know it's a classic among the organizational behavior department here. So this is the study of the Good Samaritan, where they selected groups of seminary students. They asked them to give a talk, and they told them, well, you have to come here, check in, and then you just need to go to this nearby building. It's really short walk, just across to the next building, then you're going to be filmed for your talk. What they didn't realize was that the study was actually conducted in their walk between those two buildings. They hired an actor. They had him lie down in the alleyway where those seminary students were likely to pass by. And they had him appear to be in some sort of distress and call out to the person as they were passing by. So what they found was that there were these interesting contextual factors that influenced whether the person stopped or not. So one group, they said, oh, you have a lot of time. You don't have to get to the other building for another half hour or so, so take your time. Another group, they told, oh, you have to get right over there. Everyone's expecting you. So they had this group who was hurrying next door and a group who was leisurely making their way over to the next door. What they found with the folks who were not in a hurry, a majority of them stopped to help this man in distress, full 63%. For the folks who were in a hurry, only 10% of them actually stopped to help the man. My favorite part of this study is that they also had a separate group that they told them they were going to give a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. And yet that group did not do any better than the other folks. So they wanted to see, is it just, if you prime someone to be thinking about altruism and helping others, does that help? And it turned out not so. It was actually this factor of being in a rush or not being in a rush that really affected whether they stopped to help this man or not. So it seems like the context matters, even in issues of morality and ethics, even if we're seminary students, people to whom you'd think that would matter the most. And this is something we think matters in charitable giving. So it's not just a question of my emotional state when I receive that request for a charitable contribution. It's also the context in which I'm operating in my daily life. And we think there's a lot of elements in that context that we could potentially tweak to change people's intentions and actions around their giving. It's really this interplay between our psychologies and the context around us. So over the past year and a half or so, we've been working with the Gates Foundation on exploring behavioral solutions in 3 different areas. One is thinking about, are there ways to use behavioral science and help people be more generous? So either giving more money or giving more frequently. Are there ways we can help people be more intentional and planning ahead to give rather than just being reactive and responding to these one-off requests I'm getting in my email? Finally, we're thinking about, can we help people be more informed about where they want to give? When they give to charity, does it align with their preferences around what that money is going towards? All right, so let's move back to these 3 areas. There are 2 ways that we've gone about testing these behavioral approaches. One is through just quick impact pilots. There's a lot we know about behavioral science in this space. Can we apply it quickly with partners and test it using strong and rigorous experimental methods? A second way is new product concepts. So this is thinking bigger around ideas for new products or services to actually reshape how people give, setting that moment of intentionality. So on that side, we're still in the stage of identifying partners and making recommendations around how to proceed with those concepts. But to share with you guys a few insights we've generated so far in each of these buckets. First, let's talk about generosity. So I showed you this slide before, showing how it seems like people think they or others should be giving more, and yet they aren't. This is something in behavioral science we call an intention-action gap, where it seems like people want to do something, but are having trouble following through on that action. And when it comes to giving charitably, it's often a context where it's hard to know what you should be doing, right? I don't know how much my friends are giving. I don't know how much my family's giving. I don't know how society expects me to give. So it's likely that I'll be looking to others in my surroundings for information, right? You can see this. This example is just in the church context, where I might notice what others are putting in that basket visually. But what about when donations are online? Or what about when they're hidden? And when does this matter the most? So the psychology here is something you've probably heard about in your behavioral economics classes, social norms. When you go to New York City, you probably notice that there are very specific norms around using the escalator. And in New York, they are strongly enforced that you should stand on the right and walk to the left. And if you violate those norms, people will let you know. Whereas in other cities, like San Francisco, people are pretty nice and probably won't say anything. But these social norms are always affecting us, even if we don't think about it, even if we don't notice it, they're often subconsciously influencing us. Some of you may have heard about this social norms intervention. It was with one of our affiliates who worked with a company called O-Power to send people letters about how much energy their household was using. So what the letter did was, first it told you how much energy you were using. Okay, how many kilowatts are you using? It's hard to understand what that really means. But what they did was they translated it into something meaningful by showing how your energy use compares to all of your neighbors and to your most efficient neighbors. And then it gave you a little rating based on how well you were doing. Initially, if you were not doing well, they would give folks a little frowny face, but they got so many angry customer service calls, they had to take out the frowny faces and only keep the positive reinforcement here. So this social norms intervention was very powerful. It ended up reducing folks' energy usage considerably, especially compared to alternative methods like mass campaigns about energy usage. So we use this same principle in Costa Rica, where we found a very similar context around water consumption. So we went in, we talked to a lot of households about their water use, and everyone agreed that it was important and people shouldn't use too much water. But people didn't actually know how much water they were using, and they said they thought that other people were probably the problem. I think my energy usage is okay, or my water usage is okay, but other people are probably using too much. We also found that they didn't know for sure how to change their water consumption. They didn't know of sort of concrete tactics you could employ. So what we did was, first we gave folks this little sticker on their energy bill, which showed whether they were doing better or worse than their neighbors. You can see there's a little smiley raindrop if they were doing well compared to that group, and a little frowny teardrop crying a teardrop if they were not doing that well. So this showed them how their water use compared to their neighbors. It gave them feedback about whether it was good or bad. And then we did another condition where we gave folks this information, but also some concrete tips about how they could reduce their energy usage, whether that's putting a bucket in the shower to collect extra water, or other tactics like that. So we found the social norms intervention led to a 5.6% reduction in water use. The condition with just the concrete tips had a similar effect. It was about 5.3% in reducing folks' water consumption. And it doesn't sound like a lot until you consider the alternatives, right? Which could be metering water or restricting the supply, right? These are maybe effective tactics, but they're not politically popular, and they're very difficult to implement. So this small solution of just sticking a sticker on someone's water bill is a very cost-effective way to have a fairly sizable impact. So how does this apply to charitable giving? So they did a study in an art gallery where they had sort of a transparent donation bin, and they experimented putting different levels of donations in the bin that people would see when they came into the art gallery. So on the left here, you can see one of the conditions was just an empty bin. There were no donations at all. The second condition was a high number of coin contributions. So no bills or dollars, just a lot of coins. The third group was a moderate number of low-value bills, so $5 and $1 bills. And then a fourth condition was larger denominations, but a fewer number of bills within that bucket. So they measured both the frequency of donation and the amount of donation. So first, just on frequency, which condition do you guys think had the most donations? Coins? $5. Which one do you think had the least donations? Empty? All right, so you're right. The coins, which had the most frequent number of contributions, had the highest frequency of donations. The empty box had the fewest number. This is not that surprising, right? It's giving you an indication of how frequently people are donating. But what about the amounts? Which one would have, do you think would have the highest amount per donation?
I don't know.
I heard a $5, I heard a $50. Which one do you think had the lowest amount? Coins? Okay. So the $50, the high denomination bills, had the highest amount per donation. Interestingly, the coins had a lower amount than the empty bin, right? Which is interesting. Because I guess the absence of a norm means people will interpret it different ways. But cumulatively, it seems like the coins had highest frequency, the high denomination bills had the highest amount. So which one do you think was best overall? What was the highest sort of average amount? $5? So I think you guys are getting the intuition here. It actually ended up being the $5 bills balanced out, because it didn't have as much frequency as the coins, but it had a slightly higher value, right? And it didn't have as high an amount as the $50 bills, but it had a higher frequency. All right, so other ways to talk about social norms. How else can we communicate norms if you can't actually see them? If you can't see the bin in front of you, how do you know what other people are doing or donating? One strategy that some different researchers have used is something called contingent matching. So you're probably familiar with a standard match where an organization will say, if you donate, I will match 100% of your contribution or 50% of your contribution, right? So contingent upon you taking some action, they agree to donate some amount as well. That's a standard match. Contingent matching goes beyond that by saying, we will match your donation, but only if a certain percentage of people also do it. So they wanted to know, what is the right level to set when it comes to encouraging people to match? They did a few different conditions. They said, come donate to our charity if you make it a recurring donation, and 25% of donors also do that, then we will match. So 25% you might think of, well, it's a lower threshold, so maybe it's more likely that the match will go through, right? 50%, it's getting a little bit higher. 100%, everyone else has to do it for it to actually go through. So they arranged the match from 25% to 100%. They also included a standard match. They said, we will definitely match your donation, guaranteed. Any guesses on which one of these prompted the highest level of giving?
Standard.
Okay, so I hear standard. I hear 25. I hear 75. 100%. I may have given it away by highlighting it up above. But 75% ended up giving the highest amount. All the rest of them were equivalent, including the standard match, which is interesting because you'd think a guaranteed match would be the most motivating, right? And yet 75% seemed to be the magic number in terms of people giving. Any thoughts on why that might be the case? Any guesses? Yeah.
Well, if it's lower than 25, it's easier for you to make an excuse to yourself about why you don't need to do it because someone else, oh, there'll be 75% other percent people, and there's kind of, I'm forgetting the term, but there's like a diffusion of responsibility with 25, where 75 you kind of feel like, I guess they kind of need me in order for this to happen.
So a feeling of being needed. Other thoughts?
Feel needed, but also 100% of donors sounds
Yeah.
like a bit difficult. So
Yeah.
if it's so high, the requirement, maybe you feel like not motivated.
Yep. It sounds unrealistic.
Exactly.
Yep. Any other thoughts? So this is sort of a social norms ploy because it tells you that they expect that a lot of people will donate, right? If they're expecting to to need 75% for you to do this, they must expect that a lot of people are going to do it, right? So it makes it sound more likely. It sounds like they expect a lot of other people to participate. And as you mentioned, it's not 100%, right? 100% is unrealistic. I don't think everyone's going to do it. But if it seems like you think 75% of people are going to do it, maybe I'll comply. So this is an intervention that has been tested in an online donation setting. Yeah, question.
So what was the percentage of people that ended up transforming their thing into a recurring one?
Yeah, so they didn't actually impose this condition. They actually just matched it anyway, since it was for research purposes. But the actual numbers were much lower. It was probably I think it was between 6 and 10% of folks who actually donated. But it was an unsolicited email to folks who had given in the past. So that's actually a pretty good response rate for sort of an email going out to a random group of people. Yeah. But it does raise an interesting ethical question, which is, are you lying by making it conditional? Right? You're not saying, a lot of social norms interventions will tell you how many people are donating, and in that case you would be lying. But in this case they're implying it, but not stating it outright. Right? They're implying that a lot of people might do it, but they're not saying it. Yeah. So we're testing this in a workplace where folks can enroll in paycheck contributions. So they can get some portion of their salary automatically sent into a charitable giving account, and then they can allocate those funds to a charity of their choice. So we are sending them email messaging to see if this 75% threshold nudges them to participate in this payroll deduction program. It just went into the field last month, so hopefully I will have results to share with you guys soon. All right, so let's move to intentionality. We want folks to be more intentional about their giving, less reactive. So in a survey of donors, a consulting group found that a sizable majority says that they intend to give next year, over 70%, and yet only 19% actually budget to give for the following year. So again, this suggests that there might be a little bit of an intention-action gap where I want to do this, but I'm not taking the necessary steps that might actually make me more likely to do it. This gets to a psychology that a lot of us are probably familiar with, where we continually put off something for tomorrow, what I could have done today, or probably should have done today. Let's take a hypothetical example where I have a research paper I have to complete. It's very natural to spread that work out over time, right? I know when the deadline is. Today is the start date. I imagine in my head at the start of this project that I will spread it out and it won't be too painful. Each day I'll work a little bit. Then tomorrow arrives and I think, well, today is just not the right day. I have a group activity that I have to work on. So I still have a lot of time. I'll just spread it out. I still won't have to rush because I have plenty of time. So this kind of continually happens over time. Each day I have a pretty good reason why I'm doing it. It ends up looking maybe a little bit more like this by the end, right? We're all familiar with this pattern within ourselves. And I think the interesting thing about procrastination is that in isolation, it's not necessarily a bad decision, right? My decision to defer going to the gym from today to tomorrow doesn't seem that bad. I decided not to go to the gym tomorrow because I got on Metro North. That's totally reasonable. Tomorrow, I'll probably have a different reason that I'll defer to the following day. And the point here is that it adds up over time. Each of those decisions doesn't seem that consequential until you add up the cumulative effects. And we see procrastination playing out in areas like medical testing, people putting off important medical tests that they should get, in saving for retirement or enrolling in a 401k plan, creating a will, doing estate planning, or even filling out a financial aid form. So we see that it's not that people don't care about it or that the consequences don't matter. It's just that those tiny decisions add up. There are some ways to combat procrastination. They depend on the context. But take the case of saving money. We worked with a bank in the Philippines where they had a lot of folks who opened a savings account, intended to save money, and yet never actually used that savings account beyond their first deposit. So what we did was we sat down and with some of their clients, we designed a savings plan that people could fill out at the moment of account opening. So this had a few different behavioral elements in it. First, we had them choose a savings goal that was very vivid. So there's research that shows that if you include a picture or a visualization of a goal, you're more likely to follow through on it. So we wanted to have them concretely commit to this vivid goal, select how much they were going to save, and then calculate how much they would need to save on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis to hit that goal. So we helped them plan out exactly how they could achieve their goal. So during that moment of choice, they set their goal. They also signed it at the top. There's some interesting research around how signing a form at the top rather than the bottom actually increases your commitment and your likelihood of being honest on that form. Again, we increased that vivid reason for saving, and we had them specify a goal amount. And we later sent them text and email reminders around that goal to prompt them on their way. So cumulatively, these goal setting and tracking tools ended up leading to higher initial deposits into the savings account, but also an increase in account balances by the end of the testing period. So those are some tactics that have been used in consumer finance. What about in charitable giving? Can we create that moment for folks to identify a goal and figure out how they're going to accomplish it? So we're in the middle of another test with a company called Bright Funds that provides a platform for making charitable donations through the workplace. And we're incorporating some goal-setting tools. So first, you can set a goal around what type of impact you want to have or what type of cause you want to support. We give a little bit of norming around how much Americans tend to give on an annual basis. And you get to choose what percentage of your salary you want to donate to that cause. And then finally, you get to actually execute that plan by figuring out, how am I going to do it? Do I want to set up a recurring donation? Do I want to make a donation right now at the moment? Or do I want to plan out in the future what my giving will be? So we're in the middle of this test as well. We implemented it a couple months ago, and we're just waiting to see how it impacts people's actual giving once they make it through that goal-setting process. And the final area I'm going to tell you about today is around helping people make more informed giving decisions. So are my giving decisions aligned with my goals? Interestingly, this is another survey that was conducted with donors. Out of this entire population, a sizable majority of donors said that they care about the performance of the charities that they support. And you can see some pretty steep drop-off here to who actually does any research on the charities that they want to support, right? Only 32%. Of them, an even smaller portion does research on the performance. And then at the end, only 3% actually gives to a charity based on their performance, right? So again, it seems like somewhere along this way, we must be able to prevent drop-off out of this funnel. And yet, does thinking about the impact of your donation help if giving is about an emotional connection? If it is about this warm glow that I feel, what does that mean in terms of evaluating impact and getting information about the impact? So researchers have done actually a bit of testing around this emotional type of ask versus a more statistics-based or impact-based ask. So one group, they did I think it was a mailer in the mail from Save the Children, where one condition was telling an emotional story of a person that your donation would impact. So they shared just this very heartwarming story about how your donation might benefit this young girl and her family. Another condition, they gave statistics-based information around the need that was out there. So they tested the individual, they tested the statistics, and then in a third group, they tried both. So they gave them both information about the person as well as about the need generally. Which one do you think did the worst of these three? Statistics, all right. All right. We're not cold-hearted. We get it. Which one do you think did the best? Individual or individual and statistics? So unfortunately, your intuition is correct. Individual did the best, statistics did the worst. And if you combine them, it makes it less effective than just telling the story, right? This is kind of depressing. Does it mean that our caring can't extend to caring about impact? And yet some other researchers wanted to dig into this a little bit more. So they did another experiment. One of them was Dean Carlin of Yale University, some of you may be familiar with. So in this condition, they told a story again, but they inserted some information about impact, right? And this time, so they measured the folks who just got the individual story, and the individual story plus some of these impact numbers and impact figures. This time they found, yes, it did decrease giving, but it decreased giving in different ways depending on who received the information. So for folks who had made large donations in the past, it actually increased their giving. For folks who had made donations in small amounts, it decreased their giving. So it seems like it's not having a homogeneous effect across everyone, that there might be these different segments of givers that react differently to different types of information. And these researchers call those large donors who care about the impact altruistic givers. And they call the folks who make smaller donations that's more emotionally based warm glow givers. So it seems like it's not all hopeless, right? Some people care about impact, and including information doesn't always have a negative impact. So given that, let's say some folks do want to know about the impact of their charity. How far will they get? If any of you have used a charity search function on the internet, it's pretty grim. Let's say you search for the word poverty, you probably get upwards of 7,000 results of different organizations you could potentially support. Even if you know the name of the organization you want to support, it can be hard to know which one you're supposed to give to, right? They're often not very well structured in terms of selecting a single charity. So this means that we get some negative consequences because selecting that charity is so difficult and effortful. One is that people say, forget it, I'm just going to respond to these requests when they come in and help out with my friend's cause. Some people take shortcuts, like looking at the credibility, the association of a given charity with someone else that they believe in. Some foundations at this point are coming up with parallel funds that you can donate with, so that if I like the Gates Foundation, I can put money in this fund and they'll allocate it the same way the Gates Foundation would. Some people just stick with the status quo. I'll give to the same charities every year and never vary. Some folks will not give at all. So it's not an ideal outcome here for choosing a charity. And it gets to this psychology called choice conflict. When we have a large number of choices that are hard to filter through, or if we have really complex options that are hard to sort between, we have a hard time choosing. Some of you might be familiar with the JAM study that was conducted several years ago, where researchers went into a grocery store. They set up 2 different displays. One had a proliferation of different types of jams in all delicious flavors. Another table had just a few select jams to choose from. And they found that people like having more options. More people stopped to sample jams at the table with a larger number, with a larger variety. And yet, when it came to purchasing jams, much fewer people actually purchased jams from that large variety. You can imagine that it's hard to differentiate between cranberry apple, raspberry apple, than it is to choose between 3 or 4 different types of jam. So we find this replicated in a lot of different areas, including consumer finance, where people want to have more options, and yet when it comes to choosing between those options, we struggle to complete that choice and are often more dissatisfied with our choice when we've chosen from a large number of options. So how can we overcome this? Assuming we don't want to restrict people's options in terms of charities to donate to, we can think about ways to curate the choice. So two of our founders did a study with Medicare Part D plans, which is a prescription drug plan, where the traditional enrollment process involved sort of a really long stack of papers that would be mailed to you at your house. You were forced to sort through those plans and select one that was best for you. There were 40 different options on average for people to choose from. What our founder did was he instead sent an enrollment letter on the top of this stack that, based on the person's situation, based on their data, they calculated the best 3 options for those folks and listed them along with particular attributes that they thought were most relevant for each of the options. And they found that by simplifying this choice, by giving some suggestions, they ended up saving folks around $150 per person. Again, the fact that it was a prescription drug plan made it much less complex than a general health insurance plan. But you can see here that that active curating can actually have big impact on whether people choose wisely. So one design idea that we haven't started testing yet, but that's in the conceptual phases, is thinking about different ways to curate that choice. So at one end of the spectrum, you can imagine having vetted groups of charities that people can sort through and filter from. So this still gives the chooser more leeway, but they can use these recommender tools to find a charity that best fits their situation, that's already been vetted on the impact side, that we think is high impact. On the other end of the spectrum, we have an idea that a lot of folks are interested in right now, which is field of interest funds, where I know I care about a particular cause, I want to support that cause, and I want someone else with more expertise to curate a portfolio of charities to support within that cause. So I can choose environment or water, and I can get information about how they selected the charities that are in that fund, but I don't have to do all the work. So think of it as the low-cost index fund of the charitable giving world. So I want to have time for questions, so I'll quickly wrap up. We are running a lot of projects right now. 3 of them are underway in the lab. The others, we are looking to do new studies in the next year or so. And hopefully I will have some results to share with you all in the next several months. Any questions, thoughts? Yeah?
I'm curious about the ethical implications that come with having someone vet the charities that are impact driven and successful, because that would make it seem like the smaller ones that are just trying to get started aren't going to get any donations. So how do you grapple with that ethical question when you're designing behavioral nudges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would think of it almost as different types of funds. So some donors do they want their donation to be what helps that charity push through to the next level, right? They want these sorts of high impact donations. Others only want to give to the most credible charity. They don't want to support more risky ventures. So I would think of it almost like in the stock market, funds with different levels of risk that the person is willing to bear. And it would just be about matching the right donor with the right fund. Yeah.
As the level of knowledge about behavioral economics increases, does the effectiveness of the nudges go down? Like, I think that if I get an email saying, we're going to match if 75% of you guys give, I'll just be like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's probably always a sophisticated group of people who are going to be skeptical of whatever you put in the email. I include myself in that category. But I'm skeptical that a broad group of the population would become desensitized to it. I can't think of many examples. For example, in the workplace, 401k plans are almost always now a default, right? don't have to opt into them. If you don't want to participate, you can opt out, but otherwise you'll be automatically enrolled. People might view that as being manipulative. Oh, I've heard about this intervention before, and yet it's still extremely effective. So I would guess that even if people are aware of it, sometimes it will still be effective. Yeah.
Do you have any data or research on differences between like one-time or recurrent donations and how people's habits might differ based on those two types of offerings, and then how you might nudge a person to one versus the other?
Yeah, so the contingent matching example you saw actually was nudging people to shift to recurring contributions, because they find that regardless of who it is, if you can get them to sign up for recurring contributions, they generate more value over the long term. So they seem extremely sticky. So I think most charities are incentivized to, no matter who you are, they're going to try to get you to make a recurring contribution because it removes that need to make a choice every time. In that example, they were wondering if maybe people will sign up for the recurring contribution, but they'll just decrease their giving overall. Or they'll give the same amount over time, but spread it out. And they found that wasn't the case. Folks still gave more over time than the folks who made a one-time contribution, even if it was in a higher amount. Yeah, one more question? Yeah.
So I'm just curious, within an academic world, the goal is to get at the fundamental consumer behavior regardless of context. So like this is how humans behave across all sorts of different situations.
Yeah. Yep.
So how do you balance, like what's your balance of trying to focus on the fundamental behavior, like discovering and understanding the fundamental behavior versus like you actually want something that works in this specific context. And so like we know, well, we proved it worked in this context. We don't know if it works across all things.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So typically our studies, we are running them, we want them to be as rigorous as possible, but we want the results to go to practitioners, not to be published in a journal. So that first category of wanting to test something in the best possible context so I can measure the strongest effect is not what we're concerned about. Our academic partners are, and that's why we go to them to get ideas about what to do, or if we have questions about a particular mechanism. We want to have impact in this particular context, and we hope that it's generalizable to other contexts. But for example, the contingent matching study was one of our affiliates. Mike Norton ran that study originally. He found a strong effect, and now we're applying it in the workplace to see if it also works there. So we'll often do replication to see if something works in another context, and then we could say, in employers of this kind, this is, a promising strategy to use. All right, I think we're out of time, but I'll be around for a few minutes. If anyone wants to chat, take my